If you're like me, for the past few years, you've gone with Apple's largest offering, which is the Pro Max version, the 11 Pro Max last year, and then the 12 Pro Max this year. But the 12 mini has got me reevaluating, thinking about everything I think I want from a phone. For a while now, phones have been pretty big, and we've developed this method of holding them. You know what I'm talking about. The way your pinky finger supports it at the bottom, and occasionally the other hand needs to make an appearance to help type or to navigate because the screen is pretty large. If you actually look at your pinky finger, I can almost guarantee you that you have some form of an indentation there compared to the other one, just where the phone is constantly sitting. I think that applies to the 11, the 12, and even the newer SE as well. They're slightly too large to one hand hold, but there's not really any justification for them being an awkward phone to hold. Whereas with the Pro Max, you get the bigger screen, that's the justification. It's also awkward to hold, but you get the bigger screen. But the Mini is the first phone in a long time that's just not like that. It truly is a one-handed device, and I've actually found myself using it in either hand, whereas typically I just use this hand to hold the phone. It feels natural in either hand because it's a one-handed device. All parts of the screen can be reached with my thumb without having to do the weird pinky grip hold. Some other things that I've noticed after using it for a couple of days as well. TMI, but it doesn't fall out of my pants when I sit down on the toilet. I can do things without realizing it's there, which is a very odd feeling. A great example is getting in the truck. Typically I take my phone out of my pocket because it's just not comfortable sitting in there with it in my pocket. When I leave the house, I do a quick 3-pat, phone, wallet, keys. And there's times where I've had to pat more than once where I keep my phone because it doesn't feel like it's there. It's also a lot easier to just put in your pocket quickly. Texting is quicker and feels more accurate. I feel like I make less mistakes. I'm not the only one out there that thinks this. Feels like our fingers are just designed to work better with the smaller screens, the smaller keyboards, which is the opposite of what you'd think. This can be attached to the mount that I have in my truck that I haven't really used with the Pro Max before. It's a magnet mount. Because it has MagSafe in here, you can just connect it directly to that and it doesn't fall down. Whereas with the Max, it slowly slips, ultimately falls, and it's just not safe there, especially if you go over a bump. Whereas this just stays there, which is really nice. Because it's smaller and it's easier to grip, when I'm walking around, if it's not in my pocket, it just feels like it's not gonna fall. And I guess that's all in my head, because realistically speaking, if I'm holding this, I'm not just gonna drop it randomly, but it feels just safer in your hand. And finally, and potentially a big one for a lot of people, because it's smaller, I find myself spending less time on it. I'm less engaged with it. The screen's just not as much of a wow factor, and I'm not drawn into it as much. So I find myself, if I'm using it, just putting it down sooner. I grab it less, and I don't know if that's just all in my head, but that's what I found in the past couple of days of using it. I don't find myself just aimlessly browsing because the screen is keeping me engaged. Now there's definitely a couple of adjustments, things that I noticed pretty quickly. You have a lot less real estate to view, so in a browser, for example, you can see a lot less on the screen. The instant gratification of just seeing everything when you open an app, for example, isn't there. You now have to scroll to get to what you could previously see on the Pro Max. For things like banking, where I have to physically see numbers, I find myself having to pinch to zoom, and I can't tell you the last time I've had to use pinch to zoom on my phone. I actually have my text set to the smallest size, it's just the way I like it, and I find it really is too small on the Mini. And a big one here, the battery life. Having come from the Pro Max, I pick it up off the charger first thing in the morning and it goes back down at night without me even having to question whether it's gonna last the entire day. Rarely have I ever had to charge the Pro Max throughout the day. Whereas with the Mini, I'm very aware of the fact that it could die, and in my experience it did die. I got down to about 5 o'clock and I was around 9%, so I know it would not have lasted the entire day. So I find myself in any situation where I can charge it. If I'm getting in the truck, I plug it in now instead of just leaving it, or if I'm cooking dinner, I plug it in instead of leaving it. So you have to be a lot more aware of the Mini and the battery, because it definitely will run out if you're used to something like the Pro Max. I don't want to say it's an issue because everyone's use is different, but if you're a heavy user, which I am on some days, especially if I'm not at home, then you're going to need to think about other solutions. You're not just going to be able to leave it. Also, it's so small, the wireless charger that I previously used on my bedside table no longer works. The coils don't line up because on the Mini it's just so small. Which, to add on to, has anyone noticed that the MagSafe charger is incredibly loud to attach? I typically come to bed later than my wife, and there's a visible click when you have to attach that to the back of the phone. There's no quiet way of doing it. And finally, a big one, literally the screen, especially if you're coming from something like the Pro Max. There's no wow factor. There's no screen pop, if you want to call it that. Now, I only really notice this when I'm looking at photos or graphics, things that typically stand out on the Max. I was going between phones for an hour on Instagram and saw some pictures that Becky and Chris posted. And I was on the Max and the pictures just jumped out. They looked really clean. I mean, they have a really nice style anyway, Becky and Chris's Instagram, but the pictures just looked especially nice on the Pro Max. And I instantly grabbed out the Mini out of my pocket just to see how it compared. And the wow factor just wasn't there. It doesn't pop in nearly the same way. So I think the screen size is obviously a big thing, but the wow factor keeping you drawn in and just things looking nice is just not there on the Mini. The same thing happens when I'm scrolling through my camera roll as well, looking at pictures that I've taken. Things I would look at on my Max before and just want to click on and look at a little bit longer. I don't find I'm doing the same with the Mini. Now the picture's technically the same, like the resolution hasn't changed, but it just doesn't have the same effect on the Mini. So that's my thoughts on the Mini versus the Max, and honestly, I don't think you can compare them. They are very different phones. They almost have different purposes and they make you use it differently. So, what do you think? Let me know down below if you're doing the same or trying to figure out the same thing, because I can't pick. So that is my thoughts on that. I appreciate you watching today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.